back in the dim history of pugilism, an enterprising fight manager began referring to his boxer as a tiger. And even today, in ring circles, that's the way promising young fighters are labeled, tigers. And every once in a while, a super tiger is whelped in the boxing jungle and stalks across ring history like William Blake's legendary creature, Tiger, Tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night. This is the story of such a tiger, a San Francisco Bay Area phenomenon, one of the most controversial figures ever to win the heavyweight championship and one of the greatest enigmas of ring history. The tender-hearted tiger, madcap Max Baer, the Livermore Larruper. In the parlance of the ring, Max Baer was a man of many monikers, the most familiar of which was the Livermore Larruper. But during his meteoric career, he gathered many other pseudonyms. The Battling Butcher Boy, the Pied Piper of Punch, the Laughing Boy of Boxing, and finally, when he became champion, the Clown Prince of Fistiana. Even through the pain of his very few defeats, it was impossible for him to suppress a Rabelaisian grin. This is not recommended conduct for a tiger. But Madcap Maxie never took his role of King of Beasts seriously. He would rather make people laugh than make them fall. He could do both superlatively. His widow, Mary Ellen Baer, knew Max better than anyone else.
Most people think of Max as a fighter. You know, the knockout artist, and that's logical. Because they saw only the side of him in the ring. But to us, his family, and to his close friends, we saw his great tenderness and his fine outlook on life. You know, that wonderful sense of humor that he had. It could lift you right out of yourself. These are the things I think that have been so important to his children.
His children? Max's firstborn was Max Baer, Jr. His arrival was a big moment in Max's life.
Donald, there's stories going around about the three little pigs. This is the first picture taken of the three little bears. Papa Bear, Mama Bear, and little Cubby Bear, and little Goldilocks down all over.
I think my dad started making me laugh from the day I was born. To me, even though he was my father, he was like a big, lovable baby. He might have been much bigger than I was, and a boxer and so forth, but to me he was just a big baby. I think he was afraid to really let people know him the way he really was, because he was a softy. And here is a man that was heavyweight boxing champion of the world and supposed to be a tough guy that really wasn't tough at all. That didn't even belong in the business. He didn't even belong in being a fighter.
That checks. Almost everyone who knew Max Baer intimately will talk about the contrast in the man. Ansel Hoffman, his manager, can give us some footnotes on that.
Max Baer's main fault was that his heart was too big for his fists. In fact, I had to take charge of his finances in order to keep him from giving most everything away.
And this from a man whose trade was hurting people. How could he live with it? Was he really as great as they say?
Well, I would rate Max one of the greatest heavyweights that ever lived. He had a few faults that kept him from being the greatest. He liked to clown around. He didn't take his work seriously. And he had everything. He could take a punch, he could give a punch, and he was almost impossible to hurt him. As far as I'm concerned, he could have been the most colorful fighter that ever lived.
What led up to Max Baer's becoming a fighter? Let's go way back and see what we can find. He was born on February 16, 1909, in Omaha, Nebraska, to Jacob and Dora Baer. But we find very little in early photos of the boy to indicate any tendency toward tigerishness or fighting, except Indian fighting. There is one photo that may hold prophecy, but who knows? Another might foretell his future sense of humor and mimicry. As time went on, the family moved to Galt, California, and still later to a ranch in Livermore. Jacob Baer was a skilled butcher, and a good part of Max's younger life was spent helping his father in his trade. By now, Max had become a skinny but wiry teenager, but still there was no sign of the tiger of the future. Even though Max excelled in sports, he was an exceptionally fine football and baseball player, but it was very clear that he disliked fighting, until one fateful night at a dance. An older, much bigger man accused Max Baer of stealing something from him. When Max denied it, the fellow started to beat him up. Max took a lot of heavy punches until one really stung him. Then, with one lightning swing of his right hand, he knocked his tormentor down and out. That night, he was a tiger. For this period of his life, he began to train seriously for the ring, until he attracted enough attention to get his first professional fight in Sacramento. Remember the Indian fighter? Maybe there was prophecy to that after all. The first man Max Baer ever faced in the ring was an Indian named Chief Caribou. Max knocked him out in 2 rounds. From then on, his career was studded with a series of phenomenally quick victories, almost all of them by knockouts. He was ungainly, awkward, unscientific, but he had a murderous right-hand punch that became a ring legend, and he couldn't be hurt. Dave Hope, a close friend of Max's, was working for a newspaper in Livermore when Max Baer began his career. He compiled the best and possibly the only accurate chronology of Max Baer's ring record.
Right from the start, Max had all the color and the controversy that helped make a man stand out, a champion. I saw all of his early fights in the Bay Area when he was coming up. He was a real tiger, careless of his great strength, until the Frankie Campbell fight. Max and Frankie were the Bay Area's most promising young fighters. Both were terrific punchers. Max a bit more rugged. There was great rivalry, with Max coming from the East Bay and Frankie from San Francisco. The fight was in the San Francisco ballpark, and Frankie was holding his own for the early rounds. He had Max down for no count in the second. Max always claimed he slipped on a wet spot. But it was different in the 5th. Max stormed across the ring and drove Campbell into a corner where he sat helpless on the ring ropes. He couldn't slide down as Max continued to punch away. It only took a few moments for Toby Irwin, the referee, to pull Baer away, but the damage was done. Frankie slumped to the canvas.
Frankie Campbell died the next morning, and many believe that the tiger in Max Baer died with him. This became Max's Gethsemane. He was indicted for manslaughter and jailed. Why? If blame was to be placed, why not on the referee? He could have stopped the fight. In the months that followed, even though Max Baer continued his training, he had just about decided to give up the fight game. He was hounded, vilified, persecuted as a heartless killer. Mary Ellen Baer recalls one poignant episode.
Max and I had been to a party, and after the party was over, a little boy, a 5-year-old boy, walked up to me and said, "You see that fellow over there? That's Max Baer. He killed a man." Well, Max overheard it, and on the way home, he was pretty quiet, and then all of a sudden he said, "Mom, wouldn't you think that someone would tell him how it happened? Or just explain it to him?" I think that what that youngster said hurt Max more than any blow he ever got in the ring.
But Max Baer was made of the stuff of champions. He could fight unfairness as he would continue to fight in the ring. He went to New York and began to meet the top men in the heavyweight division. But the effect of the Campbell fight showed in his losses to the master boxer Tommy Loughran and to Ernie Schaff, whom he later beat decisively in a return match. Even in losing, he was gaining stature. And at this point, his close friendship and association with two men began to shape his destiny toward its zenith. They were Ansel Hoffman, his manager, and Jack Dempsey, whose shrewd counseling and guidance led Max toward the championship. And with a new feeling of encouragement and hope, Max Baer's earthy sense of humor returned. Up ahead was the fight for the heavyweight championship. Under the tutelage of Jack Dempsey, Max Baer began to come into his own. He was in the international spotlight, and for this period at least, he trained seriously. This was a time of giants in the ring. A fighter had to be great to stay up there. Max Schmeling was among them. Schmeling was a Nazi, Hitler's darling, and he was called invincible. In one of boxing's greatest upsets, he had knocked out the rapidly rising young Joe Louis. Now he decided it was time to demonstrate the superiority of the master race over the young Jew, Max Baer. They met on June 8, 1933. This was recorded as one of the most savage ring battles of all time. In 10 rounds, the Livermore Larruper reduced the arrogant Schmeling to a rubber-legged hulk. Overnight, Max became a national idol. But in spite of the public adulation, he never forgot his family. Max visited his father and mother in California whenever he could. With his very first earnings, he had moved them from the ranch at Livermore to a new home in the fashionable section of Piedmont. Now he was in the big money. And characteristically, when his manager, Ansel Hoffman, couldn't prevent it, it burned holes in his pockets. Big cars, big parties, and big handouts to anyone and everyone. Tommy Lopresti, manager of the Hagen Oaks Golf Course in Sacramento, was a buddy of Max's.
Sometimes at night after dinner, Max would ask me to drive him down to the lower end of town that we called Skid Row in Sacramento. He'd get his pockets full of silver dollars. We'd cruise along in our little old car until we found some spot where he'd pick up an old bum. Then he'd go over to the bum and hand him $1 and tell him to get something to eat and a nice place to sleep and say, "God bless you." The man would say, "Who are you?" He'd say, "I'm Max Baer, the next heavyweight champion of the world." I never knew anyone that was quite as generous as Max. He was always trying to help the down and outer.
Life was being equally generous with Max. Payday was play day to Maxie, and for a while, every day was Ladies' Day. Women literally swooned over him and chased after him, and there is some question whether his footwork was as nimble in escaping them as it was in the ring. Hollywood called him for a starring role in the movie The Prize Fighter and the Lady, co-starring Myrna Loy. Destiny was beckoning in the form of a giant, Primo Carnera, who was then world's heavyweight champion and who also appeared in the picture with Max. They fought a mock battle as part of the film. This only added to the clamor for a title bout. and it took place on the night of June 14th, 1934, at Madison Square Garden. What happened that night has become legend in the Hall of Boxing fame. In 11 rounds, Max Baer knocked the 260-pound giant to the canvas exactly 11 times. But in spite of its ferocity, Max ran true to form. He clowned through some of the heaviest action. In the 11th round, the referee stopped the slaughter, and Max Baer was the new heavyweight champion of the world. Had the Tiger returned? Primo Carnera, who spent 2 weeks in the hospital after fighting Max, must have wondered what had become of the Tiger. Max was greatly concerned about him and visited him repeatedly. It was due to Max that hospital care was provided for the giant. Jack Dempsey was sure the Tiger in Max Baer had returned to stay.
After Max landing that first punch on Carnera's chin, there was no question in my mind that Max would be the next heavyweight champion. Max not only proved that he was a wonderful fighter in that contest, he also proved that he was a great fighter, a third gentleman in and out of the ring, and one of the greatest fighters the American public has ever had, if not the greatest. And I predict that Max will be champion for a long time to come.
It was a dubious prediction. Max now neglected his training, and when he did train, it became a hilarious romp. His sparring partners included his brother, Buddy Baer, who by now was a fast-rising young heavyweight. Buddy recalls this particular period of Max's life.
Even after he became champion, I don't believe Max took fighting as seriously as he might have. Because of his tremendous liking for people, I really believe he hated the idea of hurting them. It's been a long time ago, but I remember that once in a while Max and I'd get together for a serious conversation about life in general, and I even remember back, like Max and I, like all brothers, we used to argue and quite a bit. We never actually came to fisticuffs, but when anybody picked on either one of us, he had us both to beat, and believe me, that was a lot of bear.
Finally came the crowning moment in Max Baer's life. His marriage to Mary Ellen Baer. For the next 25 years, she was to fill his life with all the love and devotion he had ever craved. Their marriage was an event of international importance. Possibly, this was all Max ever really wanted. From his antics now, it would appear that fighting was the least of his interests. He was matched with a boxer who was said to be over the hill, had actually been on the dole, and was now on a forlorn comeback trail. His name was Jim Braddock. The impossible happened. At the end of 15 lackluster rounds, Braddock's hand was raised in victory. Max Baer had lost the title. Later it was discovered that Max had gone into that championship fight with an injured hand, a secret he'd kept even from his manager.
I lost a better man, that's all.
Now those who were wise in the ways of the ring sensed that the Tiger had vanished and would probably never return. Max went through the motions of staying in training, but usually on his own terms, requiring the least possible exertion. And inevitably, he started on a comeback trail. Among the heavyweight title contenders of the mid-1930s was a brawling tavern owner delicately called Two-Ton Tony Galento. His chief training aid was beer, and his stock comment on ring opponents was, "I'll moiter de bum." Occasionally, he almost did. The build-up to the heavyweight title elimination fight between Max Baer and Tony Galento was one of the most hilarious publicity stunts ever staged.
Oh, operator. Operator, would you give me Galento's tavern there in Orange, New Jersey?
Hello? Who is this? It's Galento's joint.
Hello, Tony. How are you? Yeah, this is the man you're going to fight. The fellow that's a bum, yes, that's me.
Why, you big bum. What are you starting that stuff? That's my line, you big bum. I'm going to murder you.
Say, listen, Tony, I'd like to speak to you, so would you put your interpreter on? Yes, all right, thanks. Hello, this is Max Baer. Say, I just wanted to call you up and let you know that I'm going to knock that fella of yours out when I fight him this coming 28th day of May. Yeah, you know, that muscle-bound fighter that you work for. You do the interpreting for him, don't you? Well, that's well. Well, just convey that message to him.
There was nothing hilarious about the fight. Galento could really fight. And it went 7 bloody rounds before Max Baer tagged Galento for keeps. Now there was a chance for another title match. But first, Max must get by Joe Louis, the sensational brown bomber. The public was already clamoring for a Baer-Louis match. It was signed for September 24th, 1935. There had been lots of clowning by Max up to this point, but those close to him sensed that he knew in advance what was going to happen in the Louis fight. It happened in the 4th round. Max Baer took one of the most awesome beatings any man had ever survived in the ring. Time had caught up with him. He had the spirit to continue, but his body refused. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, what has happened to thy might? Madcap Maxie, the Clown Prince, the Livermore Larruper, was at the end of the trail. Oddly enough, the tender-hearted tiger was just starting on a new trail, the happiest one he had ever walked. As it had with Jack Dempsey, the public now idolized him in defeat. Now he could wage the kind of battles he loved, fighting for others, especially for kids. He plunged into every kind of charitable activity he could find. The plight of others became Max's personal crusade. On the morning of November 21st, 1959, Max was in Hollywood in the thick of one such crusade when a distant bell rang. The world became aware that a great champion and an even greater human being was gone. People came from all over the country to pay final homage to Max Baer in Sacramento. His pallbearers included his closest friends, the great names in boxing's Hall of Fame: Ansel Hoffman, Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis, Henry Armstrong, so many others. A lasting epitaph for a heavyweight. In a special assembly of the California legislature at Sacramento, a commemorative resolution honoring Max Baer was passed. Today, those who knew the full scope of Max Baer's affection, his wife Mary Ellen, his daughter Maudie, his youngest son Jim, and his brother Augie, speak of him many times at the home in Sacramento. Not far away at a sunny ranch, 2 old friends get together whenever they can: Ansel Hoffman, his manager, and the incomparable Jack Dempsey.
Millions of people in this country never saw Max Baer in the ring. That is their loss. But the real loss would be in not knowing him personally as we did. That's what sticks with you, not just the fighter, but the man himself, the real Max Baer. If you ask me what was the greatest thing Max brought to boxing, I would say his sense of humor. It really never had one before. Well, that's part of the day and age, especially in the fight game. That was a very colorful time. There will never be another Max Baer, and that's the way it should be. A great guy and a great pal of mine.